This summer saw a surplus of superhero ensemble films. There was the excellent Captain America Civil War, the embarrassingly bad Batman v Superman, and now we have the culmination of the second X-Men trilogy? It's fitting, too, that this film would be the most middle-of-the-road meh movie out of the three. Hey everybody, Alex here for Nerdy Inc. coming at you with a review of X-Men: A Piece of Shit. After helming now 4 of the 6 main X-Men films, spin-offs not included, it's fair to say that Bryan Singer is the herald of the franchise. Though the ranking of the films will vary from person to person, it's pretty safe to say that this film is the worst of the 4, and maybe even the second worst overall, with X-Men 3 of course being the worst. The parallels between Batman v Superman and X-Men Apocalypse are actually shocking. That is to say, Apocalypse is about 4 different movies in one. This film's saving grace, as opposed to BVS, is that at least everything that happens in the movie makes sense. But the logic-driven story is almost the film's undoing in a way. Imagine there is a magic movie-making computer. Bryan Singer and Simon Kinberg walk up to it and say, "We want an X-Men movie featuring Apocalypse as the bad guy." The computer says, "Who's in it?" And Singer says, "Well, Professor X and Magneto, of course." And the computer says, "Describe them." And Singer says, "Professor X is in a wheelchair, but he's not bald yet, but he'll have to be bald in a few years, so that needs to happen. Also, Magneto is victimized for being a mutant, which echoes his Holocaust origins, so maybe remind people of that. Oh, and in a few years, Storm, Cyclops, and Jean Grey are going to show up, but they're teenagers now. Oh, and Quicksilver should be in there too, because people liked his scene in the last movie. Oh, and let's also get Beast and Mystique in there. Oh, and Psylocke and Archangel too. Oh, and at this point in time, Wolverine will be undergoing his Weapon X transformation." There's a lot going on there. But the computer knocks out a film in the most logical way possible. Unfortunately, it's full of just unnecessary detours that exist solely to include every element imaginable. This film is incredibly frustrating to watch as there are many segments that exist for no reason whatsoever. The gang takes a 20-minute detour to Stryker's lab just so we can get a Wolverine tie-in. There's a 5-minute slow motion scene with Quicksilver just so we can get another Quicksilver listens to music and does stuff scene. We watch another tragedy with Magneto just so we can be reminded of his stance on mutants in the world. So many of these detours are things we've seen in prior movies. You can call it continuity if you want, but it's continuity for continuity's sake, and it leaves the film horribly without focus. Furthermore, these stories are incredibly tonally inconsistent. Jean Grey, Cyclops, and Nightcrawler have an excellent, wacky, fun, teenagers learn to use their superpowers adventure. And it's great on its own, but when it's put next to a horribly heartbreaking scene with Magneto, it just feels out of place. Likewise, the apocalyptic vision of the future lacks all gravity when Quicksilver zooms around the house to another 80s tune. This movie could have gone one of 3 ways. An Apocalypse movie featuring the classic X-Men villain, another Magneto vs. Professor X ideological standoff, or a coming-of-age action-adventure featuring the teenage heroes. All 3 could have worked on their own, but the movie collapses under the weight of all 3. The film is also, unfortunately, transparent as all hell when it comes to the decisions made with the characters. Mystique is a villain, but because she's played by Jennifer Lawrence, now she's a hero, and she's always in her Jennifer Lawrence form. Nicholas Hoult is popular too, so let's make sure his blue fur is kept to a minimum, despite the fact that keeping his blue fur under control is counter to everything the X-Men stands for. Many of these veteran actors as well give some of the most subpar performances I've ever seen. Jennifer Lawrence, maybe after sick of wearing blue paint for 2 movies, phones in her performance the entire film, and Michael Fassbender seems bored out of his mind as well. The younger actors give it their all, which is great, but the lack of effort on the part of the mainstays makes it look like no one really wanted to make this movie. And looking towards the future, it's really hard to guess where they're going to take this story. We've now had 6 main X-Men movies, and they're starting to encroach on one another. When I hear about how the next movie is going to take place in the 90s, I say, we've already had an X-Men movie in the 90s. It was called X-Men. The timeline to these films is messed up almost beyond repair at this point. The movie is not a complete flatline thanks to Bryan Singer's direction. Even if the timeline doesn't make perfect sense, it directs your attention to all the right places at all the right times. Nothing feels wrong with the movie, just like in BVS, but so much of it is just unnecessary. You could argue that this is a film for the fans. And by fans, I mean people who eat, sleep, and breathe X-Men. To them, this film may work perfectly. A normal superhero movie would theoretically be the big event comic of the year. The Avengers movie are the big crossover event that happens every summer. And theoretically, that'll be the same thing that the Justice League is too. That's what this X-Men movie should have been. We got that, but we also got every single tie-in comic that comes with it. It's just a lot to do in 2.5 hours, and unfortunately, the film just doesn't quite nail it. Bryan Singer puts a joke in his movie wherein he says the third one is always the worst, taking of course a stab at X3. Unfortunately, the rule holds true for this trilogy too. And those are our thoughts on X-Men Apocalypse. Do you have thoughts of your own? Let us know in the comments down below, and as always, for more games, comics, movies, and more, keep it right here on Nerdy Inc.